Hi, everyone. This is Alison Powell. I'm one of the investigators on the VIRT-EU project, and I'm here setting up for the Mozilla Festival, where the VIRT-EU project is going to be doing an Emergent session called VIRT-EU Sandbox, Design Dilemmas in Connected Technologies. MozFest is a pretty amazing venue for us to participate in, and we are really participating in the spirit of this co-constructed event by kind of showing our work in the emerging sessions and hoping to engage people who are already thinking about questions around privacy and security and openness on the web. In the Design Sandbox, we're going to be helping to think about ethics by walking everyone through the decision-making that you might make in a small company. So our idea is we've invited our participants to become the designers and managers of a small technology company that makes wearables, and they're about to sell this product to a bigger company. And they have to make some decisions about how they're going to manage the data. Are they going to store all of the data that they're collecting from these wearables, everybody's pulse rate, sleep time, steps, movement? Are they going to store that all locally? Are they going to destroy it after people have accessed their own personal information? Are they going to let the company collect all of this information and data about people and put it into a great big repository, link it together, and use it for corporate decision making? Is the big company that our small company is selling our product to going to sell all of that data to a third party out into the cloud and make a lot of extra money? So all of these decisions have ethical implications, and what we want to do is play around with the consequences of what seems like a really technical decision. Where am I going to store my data? And show how that actually can be an ethical decision. And we're going to explore whether knowing about ethics and knowing about the moment at which you can make a decision changes the way you make you manage data within a technology company.
What I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of imagining with me. So, we are all working at a company. If you guys want to come play with us. All right. Our company is called WearWell. So if you look through this, if you open these little, our company is called WearWell. Now, the goal of the company is we're really concerned with employee well-being. You know, people work and they work too much, and we want to develop technology that can help people work more productively and be happier and make everybody, you know, it's a win-win situation. If the employees are happy, the employers are happy, there's fewer sick days, things are just better. So, we've been working really hard in creating this product. So, you are a group of fantastic designers and developers. You're very diverse. And what we're asking you to do is work with me and think through how we're going to design this thing. So one of the things that you have, the last page there, is a device specification, which tells you what is it that we are doing. There's also some concerns. We've also thought a little bit about what do we do? What are we doing? How do we measure impact? How do we think about security and privacy? Because clearly this is going to be important. And other options that we might want to consider. We really haven't thought about that, but we're asking you as a group of designers and developers to help us think through it. So, this is the product. The biggest decision that we have to make right now is about how we deal with the data and the relationships between the company, the employees, and us, the WearWell. So the decision that we want you to make today is to help us think through what might be the options. So here we have some options about what we're going to do with the data.
So we're a little company, and we're going to sell a product to a big company. So our small company is made this amazing product, and right now we are trying to figure out what we are going to do with the data that our product collects. We know that our product is very good in terms of its technical specifications. Now we need to figure out how we are going to sell our kind of data promise. And this is a design decision that's part of our product development process. So we've kind of laid out 4 different options for all of that data that is already designed into, yes, Giles? Yeah. Absolutely.
How have you funded the development of the product? You've got venture capital funding.
That's an excellent question. If we are a company that is typical of the companies that we've studied in the VIRT-EU project, we either have external funding that is not venture capital funding, angel investor funding, or venture capital funding.
That changes everything.
Yes, it changes everything. Most typically, if you have venture capital funding, when you are making this decision, you are also making this decision about how the VCs are going to see the growth of your business. And they are going to be expecting the decision you make here as a design decision to also be a business decision about how much return the venture capitalists are going to get on their device. So, Irina, do we think that we can let our design teams decide how their product has been funded, or do we want to say that these are VC funded?
I think given that we only have an hour, we're going to force them into a model of funding because there's a lot of other things they're going to need to decide. If we had more than an hour, we would definitely let you decide this. But just for now, bear with us. Yeah, we have some VCs, but they're really progressive. And they really think that, unicorn growth is not a huge goal. It would be nice, but they will be okay with us growing much more steadily, and they're a bit more progressive than you would normally think. How's that?
We could say they all came to MozFest and they care about a healthy internet.
Yes.
They're going to focus their VC decision-making model on keeping the internet healthy.
Presumably this company is based in Europe, so it's subject to European data.
This company
Absolutely.
is absolutely based in Europe.
Yes. Yes.
So these companies WearWell.
Yes. Yep.
So we are WearWell. We are making a decision
Oh,
about what
you have the
product
wrong
we
thingy.
create
Sorry.
for our big corporate clients. So
There.
we are product development. We're developing this package, this part of our product, so that we can get a really big. We're developing this part of our product so we can get a really big client, which can help us to grow as a small company.
Well, think about it this way. We're looking for an employer that would love to use our product and distribute it to all their employees. Now the question is, how do we deal with data? So let me walk you through the options really quickly. And you can have the options that are a little bit distributed over there. So option A is we track everything that's on the WearWell, but it's stored locally.
Safest option.
Well, safe, sure. The company gets aggregate reports because the device reports only aggregates out, and we then give the company an aggregate report. That's option A. Now think about the implications of this both from the design and from the company's survival point of view. Option B, we track and store data temporarily. So we get the data. It doesn't stay locally. We see the data. We can do much more processing on the data, and thus we can offer more services. But it's a temporary data store. Once the data is processed and we made the necessary decisions to provide the service, the data is erased. So that's step 2. Data travels a bit, but not a lot. Again, think of the implications of this. 3, we track, we keep for development and for improvement of our services, but we don't share the granular data with the company. The whole time the company is getting more general reports. And finally, option D, it's much more common. We track everything. We share everything with the company. We wash our hands.
Wash your hand, what do you mean?
The company gets to decide what they want to do with the data. All of it.
So option D tends to be the option that is chosen for these kinds of products. It's the option that appears to give you the greatest possible return in financial terms, because you're opening up the data that you're collecting to your client company, and the client company is then able to look at all of that data. The data itself then becomes a product, not just the device that we've all designed so carefully, but the data is also a product in option D. Yes?
Are there going to be other sensitive information like names?
No, there's no, this is tracked information. There is a link between the ID of the band and all the information on the band in option D. So that means that like that you are employee number 156754, all of your data is then sent to your client company. They presumably have another data store that has the relationship between your name and your employee number within the company that you're working for.
But it's possible to like collect the data without any of these data being collected to me. So they could be like, I don't know, be reported because maybe I'm going through depression and so I'm less profitable for the company.
In option 4, the company would have all of your data and it would be linked to your employee number. And option 3, your data would stay with WearWell, with what we were thinking, the small company that we're brainstorming as today.
Offer a service that can recognize depression and potentially help some employees through it and make it much more proactive and helpful. But we will not share the individual details with the company.
Option D though is not still GDPR compliant because you've got to say yes, and then it's okay.
Well, it's within. It can be within your employment.
Yeah. So option D, yes.
Assuming they're doing it like properly with consent and everything.
Yes, so the question is not about the question is not about whether this is compliant in a regulatory sense. This is really the design decision making within the small companies.
Design it to be compliant.
So this would be designed to be, option D would regardless be designed to be compliant.
Everything's going to be compliant, but this is a very big decision because it changes the infrastructure.
Yeah, I think what they are trying to implementation of because when you look at from the A to the D, it's a big scale. So what are you losing when you are at the A?
You lose functionality. There's a lot fewer services that you can offer when you're processing locally. When the amount of data is much less, it's individual data. You don't have comparison data. You don't have the kind of computational might that you need for certain kinds of processing and analysis. So what you do is you limit severely the kinds of services and the kinds of analysis that you can then provide as feedback back for the people who are using this device. So with every step, you're increasing the kinds of services that you can offer. And then with option D, one of the things with option D is that the data then can be used by third parties with obviously legally compliant to also offer additional services that potentially would be useful. So the trade-off is always between functionality and the kinds of ways that we might want to treat data.
I have an example. Now when you say they're very common like genetic tests, like maybe in my family run, everybody have a disease like bipolar, schizophrenia, whatever. I'm gonna test if I have some mutation.
Sure.
So technically, the company they're gonna ask for the test, they're not allowed to sell my data, but can they, under the hood, sell the data to third party, which can then use this information against me?
Well, if we're going to talk GDPR, in essence, the only way that they can sell the data is if it's completely anonymized and it's not relatable to you. But let's assume that we're talking about a country with significant employment protections, so they can't target you if they identify a mental health problem, but they do want to provide some help.
Just because the easy option would be, oh yeah, it's option A, but I want to also put in something about option A, is that because it's all done locally and the reduced functionality, that means higher costs. Because then the thing has to have storage, the thing has to have processing power, which means that the people who could afford it are a smaller number of people. So that's something to consider as well. It isn't just, obviously block the option A.
Absolutely.
Can I add something? So I want to also talk a little bit about option C. Can you go back to option C? So this is an option where, as WearWell, we track the data. We don't share the data with the client company except in its most aggregate form. But WearWell gets the option to do A/B testing. So A/B testing means that we then have a stock of data that we hold as WearWell that is about the employees' kind of measurements. And if we're thinking about this from a kind of internet health perspective, what can we then do if we're A/B testing? What are the benefits and risks of constantly A/B testing our product design? Like, are we going to try to encourage people to go to bed earlier? Are we going to,
Force them, do you mean?
So this is an interesting question, right? So we don't force them to do anything, and because we're not sharing this with the bigger company, it really has to do with what we decide as a small company what we want our business model to be. So what is it kind of, will we lose out on the sustainability of our business if we decide not to do any A/B testing? If we decide, that's option B, by the way. Option C is we decide to do A/B testing, we experiment with other possible services that we could provide. We could continue to market ourselves as a sort of, company that promotes health, but we'd be experimenting on the data.
It's a good thing.
Well, that's a good question. Yeah.
Whether your options have a very connects with the end user, because whether it's the company that the person works for or if it's WearWell. Because if you're doing certain kinds of analysis, you might be just doing it in order to have that analysis be actionable and push certain kinds of notifications, suggestions directly to the device, stepping over the role of the employer.
Well, so option C captures that from the option C says WearWell's doing that. The employer's not doing that, but WearWell's doing that. And option B as well. And actually, you could probably have, encountered companies that take these kinds of intermediate decisions in terms of their what they're trying to sell as a product. Yeah, so WearWell might decide that they really want to go into the health tech space, and without sharing any of the data, except in most aggregate form with their client companies, try to come up with a service package, for example, that's for encouraging / forcing people to go to bed earlier.
Or if you're too stressed, you should do 10 minutes of meditation. And if you pause that particular feature several times, then perhaps, the device will start needing you more often and stresses you out into meditation.
Are you getting a bit cynical?
No, I gotta keep a lid on that. The cynicism, I gotta keep a lid on that. Thank you, Fritz. Yeah.
Where's option E, where the person owns the data?
That's A.
That's A.
But that's WearWell.
No. No. No.
Local on the device.
Oh, okay. But you say it gets aggregate. How does WearWell get the data?
So basically what we do is some edge processing, and we can get some averages. Each device will give us a monthly average of, the number of things walked. We will have to work out what this looks like, because the company will still need something.
Is the company WearWell or the company who's using client company? The
Client company.
client company. But then who all of these scenarios?
Except for D.
Except for D. Yeah.
So what does WearWell get?
Nothing.
Oh,
They sell the device. So
We sell the device. We sell, we might think about how we can say, well, this is the number of people that are using it. Yeah. I think you were, and then you.
So far we've
Oh.
talked about, do you want to go? Okay. We've talked about legal issues. We've also talked about economic issues to do with cost of production and devices. We haven't actually talked about ethics.
That's a good question. About ethics. About ethical issues.
About legal frameworks like GDPR, but that's not ethics.
No? Well, it is ethics to some extent. There is a way in which it is ethics. From a deontological point of view, from a duty ethics, it is ethics. Compliance is ethical. But let's not get in there just yet. We'll get there in a sec. And you?
General reflection with respect to like usually like this is a starting point. Who gets what and all that, but I think like those who have more to lose are companies. It's their data, the ones wearing the bracelet or whatever they're doing, right? So why not making them why not working on incentives? What's the incentive for them and what they have to lose? Maybe there's also another option that is not. That is,
What do you say they're going to do?
I mean, is there data? They're generating that.
Yeah, but their company is going to protect them, right?
Totally. Oh, totally. Absolutely.
No? No, it's not.
That's what we're trying to figure it out here.
Right, so this is our axis of options. Yeah, so we're going to move on for just a moment. We're going to ask you to take a Post-it and put A, B, C, or D as your choice, and put that in front of you. So there's Post-its and there's we can offer some more services if we get the data, but the data store is temporary. So all we do is we define several services that are possible given the data we get in. We don't do any longitudinal analysis. It's just it comes in, we do a little bit of analysis, we perhaps suggest that somebody walk more or meditate more or sleep more or whatever, and then we delete the data.
This is also inspired by option B is reflected in data storage and management practices for other kinds of data. So option B, for example, is how internet data is stored in data centers, right? So all communications data in the UK is maintained in a data store for 30 days. And there is the possibility of the security services, for example, or other entities to do analysis, but only temporarily, and then the data disappears. So this is also to kind of like give you an example of other data management practices that already exist in different spheres.
In the practical world, do you face like are we free to choose your option because like you are making a partnership with the company? Does the company give you the choice? To what extent are we able to convince the company about because generally companies want to have the access?
Of course they do, but we have such a good product that we are in a unique position right now as a design team to get to make a decision about the way that we're going to bring data management into our design practice. And so the product is good enough in this scenario that we've got the power to tell our client company what our strategy is going to be.
Of course, there are limits, and you should consider the fact that we do need to think about subsequent sustainability.
Do you know them?
Hmm?
You know the solution already, isn't it?
No,
We don't actually know the solution. There isn't a solution.
There isn't. It's a choice to be made. And the reason why we set this up this way, that fundamentally this is an ethical choice. There are the ethics involved in what we're doing here. And the goal of the project is to think about where ethics is involved and how and why. And the thing about ethics is it's not about whether a decision is ethical or not, it's how you get there. And so the next step is how do we get there? What are some of the ways that we might want to think about this? So now that you've made your decision.
They made their decision. We need to give everybody a minute to make a decision.
Oh, wait. Yes, make your decision. A, B, C, or D. It's okay. You'll have a chance to change it, but make it now. We'll come back to it. Come on. A, B, C, or D.
It's a bit like GDPR though, because you've got to say when you store data, you've got to say what it's for and how long you need it.
Yeah, so any of these would be GDPR compliant.
Yeah.
Because in any
Yeah.
of the cases
Do not
you
worry
would say,
about.
we're going to store it this way for this long. In A,
But
we're
I mean,
saying
you
we're not
could technically say everything is temporary because this is my temporal list. measure?
Yes,
It's
but
70 years.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Like, what do you mean by temporarily? Like 30 days? Or
30 days. 30 days. Assume that's 30 days.
It might be 100
Yeah.
Functionally, it's not temporary. So we're really trying to not be, we're not working in compliance.
Yeah.
Well, can be temporarily even like 1 year.
30 days. We're saying 30 days. Well, we can debate that later. All right. Have you made a decision? Even if you're organizing. All right. So let me introduce some little bits of complexity. Ah! We're reminding you now. We want to remind you about the fact that the fundamental values for this company are well-being and privacy, and we really want to live up to that. So as you think through your decision,
They're ready against each other.
Anybody want to tell me what you're thinking right now?
That's exactly what I'm thinking. That means nothing.
I love it.
And this is like, oh yes, I really care about privacy. That means nothing. And there's not a legal standpoint. That means nothing.
It's about reputation.
So if you think that maybe like someone writes an article in the press saying WearWell says they care about privacy, but they just really don't because like look at this.
No. I think it's people can say things, but I'm looking for is a privacy statement.
Yes,
I'm
I
looking
agree.
for a legal this is what we're going to do. This is how much.
Well, you are the design crew. We're figuring this
I know,
out
but
together.
it's important
You just keep in mind that this is important to us.
I know, but it's
Okay, we're gonna write
Sorry.
below there, like we are under the law statement, it's under this regulation, it's gonna be a PDF long 10 page somewhere on the internet that refer to us.
Totally.
I mean, to me, the basic question is how do you define well-being and what are the criteria to decide that
Yes.
there is a well-being within the company. In my company, there is so much, in the organization, there is so much diversity. Some of us feel powered up and better if we work more late hours under stress. Others need their little corner and long time to rest. So, I think this is where I have a problem with the option D is like how much do we impose what a well-being for an organization or a company to the client will mean? How will you ensure that it considers the specifics of individuals?
About chronic illness.
This is where I guess if you're collecting all the data and sharing it with lots of people, how are you ever going to answer that question if you just keep that data and like, oh, it's just yours?
By not collecting the data and actually talking to people, that's the only way to do it. Frankly, for me, ethics would be refusing to make the product because the product is fundamentally evil.
Yeah.
Essentially, what you're doing is you're basically selling a tool of enslavement. That's why I was asking about.
Yeah.
When you talk about ethics, is your ethic going to be? You really believe this?
So, and this is also to do with the ethics of well-being, right? So what well-being, how far, what is it? Does the design team walk away and say,
This is the ultimate ethical question for us.
yeah. Design team resigns.
People like, how can they force you to follow their...
So, well, think about how Amazon, I'm assuming this is kind of to me this is sort of like Fitbit and Amazon kind of collaborating together. There's an axis of evil and essentially controlling people. So, for instance, you've probably heard the stories of how people at Amazon are tracked
Yes,
and that they are timed to everything, including their toilet breaks,
yes.
which in Europe is actually illegal in most jurisdictions. So it's essentially, they force their employees to wear this type of technology to track the movements, to understand their productivity, and it comes down to most people in those kind of situations are on 0 hours contracts. So if you are less productive than other people, you're offered less hours per week. So this is how these things come to essentially push people into away from the kind of employment, the socialized employment structures that have evolved over the last 100 years in Europe.
Is that possible?
So it's deeply political.
Okay, should we get to capability?
We're different from USA. It's not possible
okay.
with regulation in order that we don't make this happen.
How do you make it individualized? I guess for me the problem I was looking before in the slides, you had employees have the option to turn it off. What I don't think I saw is opt out fully. Like I just don't want it. And if that's there, then I might say okay.
But that's a company policy.
Okay, but there wasn't.
So
enough
this is a
policy.
design problem, right? Can we actually get at any of those ethical questions at this point in the design decision process, given that we are like embedded in this bigger structure, right? And we are encouraged to think about ethical principles like the virtue of being healthy, for example. So we are invited to think about healthiness as a sort of virtuous, desirable, ethical end. Is it worth the means of getting to the desirable, virtuous, ethical end of, designing a system in which we don't even have the capacity to say you can opt in or out as WearWell's designers. We are just making something, and these are the things that we can decide about. So, Irina, do you want to?
What does it mean?
Of course, cuts both ways. So your ethic might be one of exploiting other people. That's also an ethic.
Well,
ethic is a particular vision of well-being, which matches onto option A, B, C, and D, which are all the same in terms of that vision of well-being. So if you have a different vision of well-being, you just cannot even enter that boardroom.
sure. And so we have all kinds of views on this. And we as a design team, we come at it from a particular set of backgrounds, from a particular set of experiences, and a particular kind of politics that we've all internalized and believe that's what a just and a good world looks like. So I wanted to introduce an employee at one of our testing companies that's been helping us out and sort of just testing out the product to give you a little bit of a glimpse into what it's like to use WearWell in a company, and so you can listen to sort of the end user voice. You want to be the end user voice? Be the end user.
Okay. Hi, I'm the end user. I work in the sales department at a big company, and I've got 2 kids. And should we tell them a little more about me?
Yes.
How much more do I know about me? Okay, what I'm gonna say, I love WearWell. It's helped me keep a lot of mental clarity on difficult days. I'm super excited about the new period tracking feature. I've always had a lot of pain and mood swings with my period, makes it hard to come to work. So I've shared my data with my line manager, and finally he understands and lets me work from home when I need to. And so the meditation requirement goes up when I have my period, but it's cool. Like I hear from studies that it helps, to do more meditation when you're, in a situation of more stress. So yeah, that's really my experience of using WearWell.
And really, there are quite a few employees that feel that getting WearWell is something that the company is really showing they're caring about more than just dumb efficiency. That, by providing spaces for meditation and things like that, the company is actually making the employees feel a little bit more like a community or a family, and less like a sort of a farm where they come in and they do their thing and they leave. So there's some voices to that we're hearing that are quite, they're perhaps, in this case, in that particular company, it's a technical company, so there are fewer women in the company, but they're really enjoying having this technology.
Do you have negative reviews? I need negative reviews.
Yes?
That's a quality interview, and where's the other, what's the numbers? You need to hear one person's view is great, very useful, but you also need to back it up with the more sensitive?
Sure, and when we look at larger numbers, when we look at larger numbers, we get fairly average reviews, and then the employees generally kind of find it's fine. They're not either super excited about it or super upset, but the averages are pretty much sort of where you would expect them. Nobody's like super excited, but generally, we're slightly on the positive side of things, so, But the reason why is because there's some minority voices that kind of get lost in the in the larger averages. I'm just saying.
I would like to hear from them.
Well, you just heard from one. That is a minority voice. I have an hour to run this workshop. I could do half an hour of performances for you, honestly. Yes.
Not good enough to hear one minority voice, because it's easy to pick out one that sounds about like average. I want to hear the extremes, so that I can understand how far, what it feels like for someone else, or from a completely different point of view. It's like when you go to Amazon or anything like that, and you look at the reviews, you look at the extremely positive or the extreme negative, and you then gauge, okay, this is how bad it could be, this is how good it could be, and then you work out, okay, this product might be okay.
But would it validate this if 100% of the company said, yeah, we're happy with it? Would it make it more ethical?
It's a good question.
Basically,
That's a good question.
There's like this such developed critical thinking inside the company. It's probably the contrary. It depends on the type. I should assume, I'm sorry, I'm like assuming too much, but it probably depends on what kind of company it is. So you probably they have 100% of, not very critical employees. So that there's a possibility. It all depends on your grip of control. And it's probably, as a design team, we need like more feedback from the methodology that has been used to build up this.
Sure, and I agree with all of this. But what I also want to point out is something important, is that when as a design team, we come at this and we think about these issues of how do you conceptualize well-being and who owns the data, we also need to remember that we're coming at this from a very specific, very Western, very white middle class to upper middle class kind of position. And that we're also imposing our view of what's important onto a range of people, many of whom may be in completely different positions. And so one of the things that we're trying to do with this is to say that there are and can be very, very different reactions and views on this that will put this into conflict with the kinds of views that you think are right. So I want you to think about the fact that your position in the world, no matter how just and how good you think it is, it also may be imposing a set of ideas and views on people who would potentially actually benefit greatly from a device that's carefully designed like this. So just a dismissal of it may be something that is, again, getting imposed. So there is an ethical question there also to reflect on your own position and your own assumptions.
But as ethical designers, I believe our challenge here is to deliver the most beneficial product and yet do it in an ethical way.
True.
Is there a way to do it in that you can still have the input from the employees or some different test groups with different opinions in it, so that you have options in every company to adjust to the different needs of its employees?
So that's a design decision, and it's a change in how the design process would happen, and both also how the implementation process would happen for this device. But it is also recognition that perhaps we don't know best.
And perhaps we need to restructure our decision making rather than just having this turn up as if it was almost a kind of commercial for how great our product is likely to be. And I have to say that the last time we did this talk, and we talked about period tracking, the audience responded in a very different way because the audience was made up of a very different set of people.
So this is perhaps an atypical design team in terms of its diversity and its makeup.
What was the reaction?
People got uncomfortable as soon as you said the word period.
Say what?
People got uncomfortable as soon as we said the word period. There are, and so the reactions are very different. I mean, the thing is that, but one of the things that I want to point out is what we're doing here is we're bringing in this idea and we're challenging this idea that you want to be ethical, but you need to be reflective of your own ethics because it's a position. Ethics is a position. It's a way of thinking. It's not, and there are many different ethics, many different ways of thinking, and they all will lead you to a different decision process. You might end up at the same decision, but it'll be a different decision process.
I feel like we're getting here into the boundary between politics and design.
Yes.
And I wonder if what you just said, I was really with you. I think you said that these questions of political questions of democratic, for example, working out our differences together, are now folded back into the design, into this room around the table with a set of experts that I see the utility of that to speaking with technology designers who will then take that and say, okay, this is again for us to work through and decide about. But on the other hand, it's taking it out of that political conversation. So I wonder if
it's a political conversation as well, because this can be used as a weapon. Data can be a weapon against people that collect them. Here there is a bit of mistake because they say that we are talking to the client, but actually this is not the client, the company. So you're maybe asking the people, this is the user, the end user, yes.
And who is the end user is also an interesting question.
Actually the company pays you, not them. So you might end up with a product that nobody will buy because you ask the wrong people about what features you have, and of course, being the weapon, it also needs to be.
Yeah, I think it's related to the end user, because here we are talking about the company, we are talking about WearWell, and so we are excluding one important component, which are here in this particular case the employee. I think we are the end user. So do they have a say in this decision?
So here is another question about.
Because it's like we are doing it for them and not involving them in actually making the decision.
So this is also a very interesting ethical question because we have been assuming that we are going to act ethically on behalf of some people who are going to benefit from our actions, which are to care for them, which of course has its own political stance, which we might also call paternalism. And it is often used as a way of arguing for something that is good ethically. Say, oh, we're going to go and care for, these other group of people. And if there is no notion of whether that other group of people have autonomy in defining or the capability to define their own meaning for what it means to be cared for or whether they would actually like to be cared for or not, is outside so far of the the decision-making patterns that we've been engaged in. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, from that, you could say that the most ethical position would be for WearWell to act as an agent of the end users. But I'm not sure that that's actually going to happen because, even if your first customer is the most ethical company in the world, as a VC-funded startup, eventually you're going to have to sell this product to Amazon and any other company. And you're not going to be an agent of Amazon employees. You're going to be an agent of Amazon at that point. So you need to make some kind of commitment at the start that's not reversible, even when it turns even later on.
And this is the real challenge of practical ethics, because I feel so far that we've got a kind of practical ethics that's embedded in a kind of extractive mode of political economy. So the limits of our practical ethics are somehow constrained by the limits of how we are invited to package up, buy and sell, and what is on the axis of options. So you pointed this out earlier, what's on the axis of options is not the full range of options, but it is an axis of options that's provided by the existing data-based market and frame. I'm not even, we can call it what you like. You could call it a political economy. You could call it surveillance capitalism. You could call it, the way the world works now. But this is.
Given where we are, we're in a design school. Design schools develop pieces of products which are designers, and they gauge and they build their reputation on how many of their designers they manage to get into employment in situations like this. So it's part of a much bigger set of ecosystems about.
And I think one of the things we've been trying to do in our project, and I realize we are going to have to draw to a close momentarily, is 8 minutes. Okay. Irina, what else do you want to talk about in 8 minutes?
Okay. So let me just give you a little bit of a framework of what it is that we're actually doing. So this was actually normally it's designed for a 2-hour workshop, and it works a little bit more dynamically, and we also typically have people stand up and move around to options instead of argue with each other. So we didn't have to get you to stand up to argue with each other, so that's great. In any case, so we have these 3 interventions. Once we gave you the frame, we gave 2 interventions. The third intervention is this one. It's a little email that you get that basically says, oh, our algorithm is a little bit like it works. We got some data training set problems. It works on for certain populations, not for others. It's a little bit less useful for, we noticed some irregularities. Some people benefit more than others. Do we still want to do it? How do we deal with this? And then, you have a discussion. And I'm not going to put this as an actual option, just sort of walking you through what's left because we only have 8 minutes. Because in the essence, what we're doing is this. We're a project about ethics. And what we're thinking about is, what does it mean to have a practical ethics? A practical ethics that allows you to think through some of the dilemmas and some of the problems that you have to work with as a designer or a developer, and to acknowledge that your wiggle room is actually fairly small. There's not so much that a lot of people who work within design and development that have startups or work for bigger companies, a lot of times the wiggle room for deciding what's right and what's wrong, there's too many competing pressures. And there is not a single ethical framework that will let you make all the right decisions, because none of them are complete, and all of them have their positives and they have their negatives, and they cover some situations and not others. And so what you've actually observed is 3 different ethical frameworks in action. Right. Where are we? So what's ethics? Right. So we looked at consequentialism and then we said, nah, doesn't work. Because
we did make some consequentialist arguments earlier. I'm sure you recognize the common good, the idea of the individual, the idea of the greatest utility for the greatest benefit for all. We are going to roll this out to everyone because we think well-being is the overall goal. And this is also connected to the idea of the personal and individual virtue. We're all going to become better people by getting better feedback and learning to meditate more often and maybe go to bed earlier.
Right. So then we came in and we said, okay, but one of the gaining frameworks for ethical frameworks right now is virtue ethics. And virtue ethics is about developing a moral character. It's the individual developing a moral character. You have to do the right thing. And how do you know to do the right thing? Well, you develop a moral character that allows you to decide what is the right thing. And it allows you, and essentially you need to focus on values. So us reminding you that the company's values are privacy and well-being is a way to think about, because one of the ways that virtue ethics works is it makes you consider your reputation. Do you want to be known as a company that doesn't respect privacy? Well, maybe you should make them decisions so that this doesn't show up in a newspaper article.
That's a very small question. Privacy was not collecting data from users?
That's a very complex question. It's not a simple question.
I was expecting yes or no, because I have this conclusion that I think that everybody says, like, no, we value privacy, therefore we do not collect data. In my head, it's something like we value privacy. It means that we do not put data on USB sticks and leave them in the airport or publish them on the internet. It's not that we do not collect data. So because people
But that means we need to just, right.
Can I give a philosophical definition of privacy? So the philosophical definition of privacy in a rights-based framework is the right to be let alone. So what does it mean to be left alone? So it doesn't mean not collecting information about you, it means not acting on that information to infringe upon your right to be left alone.
And in essence, if you consider it as a right to be left alone, you as a person, it's not your responsibility to be left alone. It's the responsibility of everyone else around you to leave you alone. So in the rights-based framework right now, privacy is defined as the right to control, which shifts all of the responsibility for your data onto the individual. So in GDPR, those two are fairly those two are at odds, but these are two different definitions of privacy. So in that sense, as WearWell, you would have to figure out what you mean by privacy in order to design this. And that would need to be a discussion, unless you basically say privacy is compliance.
Which a lot of companies do say privacy is compliance, and we started out as well with tons of questions about GDPR, like as if GDPR was going to let a company be ethical. What we've discovered across our 3 years of research is that as soon as GDPR came out, companies started saying, well, we comply with GDPR, so we can say that we're an ethical company. And so none of these questions that we are now raising about what actually like an ethics in practice looks like are represented by that, well, we complied with GDPR. I'm also really sad because in the months before GDPR, I thought there might be an opportunity to make the GDPR like a basement that you could build an amazing set of like different kinds of technologies and business models around that would think about this sort of like compliance as the very, very bare minimum and kind of concoct an entire ecosystem. I know my enthusiasm is undampened by my 15 years of experience. I mean, the day after GDPR came out, I was like, hopes dashed again. Of course.
Oh, yeah.
Then it's not in the cards.
No, because compliance, right?
Right. Do you want to go to your final two?
Yeah. So my final two are virtue is kind of your goal, but what we did with the user study, and so to bring in these minority voices and reminding the designers that you're not all-knowing and that your position and your view needs to be challenged, needs to be reflected, and sometimes your notions of justice come from a very specific place. And so care ethics forces you to think about the minority voices, the kinds of relationships that you're intervening in, what's already there and why it's there, and what is actually something that needs to be considered. But care has limits. You can't care about everything. And so really the last one is when we came in and said, but the algorithm only works for this kinds of people or not those kinds of people, or kind of worse, do we still do it? Is that capabilities approach is the third one that we use that gives you the idea that you need to think about the kinds of constraints that are there. And the capabilities approach is interesting because it's about what are you capable of yourself, the designers, what are your capabilities given the structural constraints that you work with, but also thinking about the fact that the things you develop become constraints and capabilities, something that allows, something that encourages, enables, and constrains for the people that use these technologies.
I have one last thing to say about this triangle. As you can see, the triangle has different points of entry. And we don't think that any of the points of entry is necessarily sufficient, but I actually think they are all enabling in different ways. If you begin with thinking about how you are trying to put ethics in practice as an entry point from one of these points, you may be able to exert some, to exert some influence at those. So if we're thinking about what Giles pointed out about the whole idea of designer and the role of the designers in enabling these kinds of weird constraints, right? Like we got into oh wait, even if we make a good technology, it might have a really bad outcome. That's a question of capabilities. And I think from my own perspective, the space in between care and capabilities, but starting from the notion of capabilities, can enable us to do a lot of different things, because we can start thinking, what are the capabilities to change the design field, for example? so that we have, you know, people who are enabled to act in different ways. And, you know, if we start from that perspective, you know, how can we push towards thinking about care in a less paternalistic way, in a more enabling way? Obviously, my enthusiasm remains unbound.
From half of you, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hands up in the last like 5 minutes, but we really wanted to get you to the triangle.
Thank you.
We worked for 3 years on it.
Thank you. That's amazing.
Yes, thank you so much for
Thank you for coming.
Amazing.